It was just another evening in the quiet apartment of a young man living alone in the heart of the city. He had worked a long day and was looking forward to a relaxing night. The clock showed it was nearly 8 p.m. when he decided to order his favorite pizza. He logged onto his phone, clicked a few buttons, and confirmed the order. He could already imagine the warm pizza and the comforting movie that would follow. After about 30 minutes, the doorbell rang. He opened the door expecting to see the usual delivery driver, but standing on his doorstep was something he didn't expect. Something, or rather someone, completely out of the ordinary. A tall woman, perhaps a few inches over 6 feet, stood there with a pizza box in her hands. She had striking, purple skin and long violet hair that cascaded down her back. Her eyes were a bright, glowing blue, and her face held an expression that seemed both tired and uncertain. The first thought that crossed his mind was that she was wearing a costume, perhaps someone from a nearby Comic-Con or some elaborate Halloween setup. But no, the strange tattoos on her arms and glowing patterns on her chest made it clear that this was something far stranger than any costume he had seen before. "Pizza," she said softly, almost hesitantly. Yeah. "That's me," he said, still staring at her. His voice was filled with a mix of surprise and confusion. "Thanks." He reached out to grab the pizza, but as his hand touched the box, something unusual happened. She didn't let go right away. Her grip on the pizza was firm, but there was a brief moment of hesitation before she released it. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing how pale she looked, even under the soft light of his porch. The woman shifted uncomfortably, looking down for a moment. I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted quietly. "I'm homeless." Her voice trembled slightly, and for a moment, the young man didn't know how to respond. Was this part of some strange prank? Or was this alien woman really in need of help? He quickly glanced around, unsure of how to process what he had just heard. The street was quiet, and there was no sign of anyone else nearby. "Wait, hold on," he said, trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "You're saying you're homeless?" The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I've been traveling for a long time. From planet to planet. I came to this one looking for shelter, but I haven't found any." She hesitated again, her eyes glancing down at the pizza box as if she wasn't sure how to continue. The young man wasn't sure what to say. He looked at her, trying to make sense of her words. She was definitely not from around here. He could tell that much. Her skin, her eyes, even the way she spoke felt different, as though she wasn't human. And yet there she was, standing in front of him, asking for help. Without thinking, he asked the first thing that popped into his head. "Do you need a place to stay?" For a moment, she didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her glowing blue eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions. The pause felt long and uncomfortable, as if she wasn't sure how to react to his offer. Finally, she spoke again. I don't want to be a burden," she said softly, glancing around as if worried someone might be watching them. "I just need somewhere safe, even if it's only for tonight." The man stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. She looked so fragile, yet there was something powerful about her, something he couldn't quite understand. She wasn't human. That much was clear. But what was she? Why was she here? And why had she appeared at his door, of all places? He knew he should probably turn her away. He didn't know her, and she looked nothing like anyone he had ever seen. But something about the way she spoke, about the sadness in her eyes, made him hesitate. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay for tonight. But just for tonight, okay? I don't know who or what you are, but you seem like you need help." Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a brief moment, he saw a flicker of gratitude. It was almost as if she hadn't expected him to say yes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you so much." He stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. As she passed him into the apartment, he noticed how tall she really was. Definitely taller than him. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly under the light, and her tattoos glowed faintly as she moved. She set the pizza box down on the kitchen counter with ease, looking around the apartment as if it was the first time she had seen such a place. The young man shut the door behind her, still unsure of what was happening. He had invited an alien into his home, a stranger from another world. And while part of him felt uneasy, another part of him couldn't help but wonder, was he doing the right thing? "Would you like some water?" he asked, trying to keep things normal, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest. "Yes, please," she replied softly, her gaze still moving around, as if she was taking in every detail. As he turned to grab a glass, he wondered what kind of story this alien woman had. How had she ended up here, on Earth, in his apartment? And more importantly, what would happen next? The young man watched the alien woman sit down at his kitchen table, still unsure of everything happening around him. He had offered her water, and she accepted gratefully, though her hands trembled slightly as she held the glass. There was a strange tension in the air, but neither of them spoke for a moment. The man found himself staring at her, trying to understand what was going on. She wasn't like anything he had ever seen. Her purple skin and glowing tattoos were both beautiful and unsettling at the same time. Her violet hair shimmered in the light, and her large, bright eyes seemed to study him in return, like she was trying to figure him out as much as he was trying to figure her out. Finally, the silence was broken when the man spoke up. "So, you're not from around here, huh?" he asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't know what else to say, but the words just came out. She smiled, a soft, almost sad smile. "No, I'm not," she said, her voice still quiet but steady. "I'm from a faraway place, a long way from here." The young man leaned against the kitchen counter, still looking at her. "Where are you from?" he asked, curiosity taking over. He couldn't help it. He had so many questions. Who was she? Why had she come to Earth? And most of all, why had she ended up at his door? The alien woman paused, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of the glass as she thought for a moment. "I'm from a planet called Teshera," she said finally. "It's a long way from here. My people, we were explorers. We traveled across the galaxy, discovering new worlds." She looked up at him, her eyes distant, as if she was remembering something painful. "But we were not alone in the galaxy. There are others out there, powerful, dangerous beings who do not want my people to survive." The young man frowned. "What do you mean? You were attacked?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, a galactic empire. They came to our planet, destroyed everything. My people, they were hunted down. I was one of the few who managed to escape. I've been running ever since, looking for a place where I can be safe, a place where I can survive." The words hit the man harder than he expected. The thought of an entire species being wiped out by some powerful empire was hard to grasp. He could see the pain in her eyes, the loss she had experienced. And yet here she was, sitting in his small kitchen, offering him a glimpse into a world that seemed so far beyond his own. "You're the only one left?" he asked quietly, his heart heavy with the thought of her loneliness. "No," she replied softly, shaking her head. "There are others, but I don't know where they are. Some were captured. Some disappeared. I don't know if they're alive." She paused, a deep sadness filling her voice. "I'm alone, and I don't know how much longer I can keep running." The man felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose everything. Family, home, even the very planet you came from. And yet, this alien woman had survived it all. She had somehow made it to Earth, alone, and now she was standing in his apartment. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. He wasn't sure what else to say. He didn't have the right words to comfort her, but he wanted to help. "I can't imagine what you've been through." She looked at him then, her glowing blue eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of quiet gratitude. "It's Hard, but I have learned to survive. It's all I can do. There was another silence, but it didn't feel as awkward this time. The young man realized that for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something meaningful. It wasn't much, but he had invited her in, and that meant something. He wasn't sure how much he could help, but he could at least offer her a safe place for now. "So, what happens next?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I mean, where do you go from here?" The alien woman seemed to think about it for a moment, her gaze turning inward. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've been to so many places, and each one seems to lead to more danger. Earth is different. It feels different here, but I'm not sure how long I can stay. I can't stay hidden forever." The young man frowned. "But you don't have anywhere else to go, right?" He knew the answer, but he needed to hear it from her. She nodded. "No, I've been traveling for a long time. I don't know who to trust anymore. But I feel safe here with you." The words struck him harder than he expected. She trusted him, this strange alien from another world, with her life. It wasn't just the pizza delivery or the small favor he had done. It was her life she was placing in his hands. His mind raced with the possibilities. What was he getting into? What kind of dangers would he be facing if he helped her? But then he looked at her again, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't turn her away. Not now. "Well," he said after a moment, trying to sound more confident than he felt, "you're safe here for now. At least for tonight. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but we'll figure it out. One step at a time." A small smile appeared on her face, and for the first time, the young man saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time that night, he felt like maybe he had done the right thing. The young man couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. It had only been a few hours since the alien woman had arrived at his door, and now she was sitting in his small living room, looking more at home than he ever expected. He had offered her food, and she accepted, though she seemed hesitant. Her alien nature was still very much present, her strange skin, glowing tattoos, and the otherworldly eyes. But there was something about her that seemed human. She was vulnerable, just like anyone else. The quiet of the apartment filled the space between them. The woman, who had introduced herself only as Zora, sat on the couch, her long purple hair cascading over her shoulders. She still seemed nervous, like a bird unsure whether it was safe to fly. He couldn't blame her. She had no idea who he was or whether she could trust him completely. And yet here she was, relying on his help. "I'm sorry I don't have more to offer," the young man said after a moment. "It's just me here, you know. I don't have much." Zora looked at him, her glowing blue eyes softening as if she understood. "I don't need much," she replied, her voice gentle. "A safe place is all I need for now." The man nodded but still felt a weight in his chest. He could sense there was more to her story. It wasn't just the fact that she was an alien or that she had nowhere else to go. There was something else, something darker, that she wasn't telling him. He wasn't sure what to ask, but the curiosity gnawed at him. "Zora," he began cautiously, "you said before that you've been running for a long time. What's chasing you? What's the danger?" Zora's face tightened at the question, and for a moment she didn't answer. Her eyes grew distant, and the air in the room seemed to grow colder. It was clear that whatever had happened to her was something she didn't want to talk about. But the young man couldn't ignore the sense of dread that was now hanging over the room. She had already told him her people were hunted by a dangerous empire, but that didn't seem like enough. She had been running for far too long for it to just be about a few bad encounters. Finally, Zara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just a galactic empire. It's something worse. The empire might be powerful, but they're not the real threat." The young man leaned forward. "What do you mean? What's the real threat?" Zara's hands trembled as she looked down at them. She seemed unsure whether she should continue. There's a race of beings. They are not human, nor are they like anything you've ever seen. They are hunters. They travel from world to world, picking off anyone they deem weak. They are relentless. They don't care about who they hurt or how many they kill. She paused, then looked at him directly, her eyes filled with an intensity he had not seen before. I was one of their targets. His heart skipped a beat. So these beings, they want you dead. Zara nodded grimly. Yes, they've been hunting me for a long time now. They never stop. If they find me, they will take me. They will make sure I never escape again. The man swallowed hard. He had assumed that the worst part of Zara's story was the destruction of her planet. But now he understood that the real danger was not the loss of her home, but the threat of these relentless hunters. He couldn't help but feel a wave of sympathy for her, and at the same time, fear began to creep into his mind. This wasn't just some lost traveler in need of help. She was running from something far worse. Are they close? He asked, his voice shaking slightly. Zara's expression darkened. I don't know. They could be anywhere. They are not bound by the same rules you humans are. They can track someone across galaxies if they choose. And they never stop. The man felt a chill run down his spine. Is there anything I can do? Anything to help? Zara shook her head. No. I've tried everything. Running. Hiding. I've even tried to make allies. But no one can stop them. They are too powerful. They have no weakness. The young man thought for a moment. Then why are you here? Why Earth? Zara's eyes softened. Earth is different. I've been to many worlds, but I've never felt as safe as I do here. You're the first person who's offered me help without asking questions, without judging. I've always been alone, but here, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. The words left him speechless. Zara had placed her trust in him, in his small apartment, in this strange little world that seemed so far from the danger she had described. He didn't know what kind of power these hunters had, but it sounded like they were unstoppable. But still, there was a part of him that couldn't turn her away. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the night. The streetlights below flickered in the dark, and everything seemed so peaceful. But his mind was racing. What if these hunters found Zara? What would happen to her? And what would happen to him if they came after her here in his home? A sudden thought struck him. He couldn't just sit back and wait for them to show up. He had to do something. He had to protect her. He turned back to Zara, who was still sitting quietly, watching him with a mix of hope and fear. Zara, he said, determination in his voice, I'm not going to let them hurt you. Not while you're here. I don't know how, but we're going to figure this out. Together. Zara's eyes brightened, and for the first time since she arrived, a real smile spread across her face. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. The young man knew that he was stepping into something much bigger than he ever expected. But in that moment, he didn't care. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. Whatever dangers lay ahead, he would face them with Zara by his side. And they would fight to survive. The night felt heavier now, the silence thick with the weight of Zara's words. The young man sat at his kitchen table, staring at the half-empty pizza box between them, though he wasn't hungry anymore. His mind raced with the information Zara had shared. Dangerous, relentless hunters, an unstoppable force that could track her across the galaxy. He couldn't ignore the feeling in his chest, a mix of fear and determination. Zara sat across from him, her eyes downcast. The calm she had shown earlier had vanished, replaced by a quiet intensity that made the air in the room feel charged. The glow of her tattoos flickered slightly, as if responding to the emotions running through her. It was as if her body was trying to communicate what words couldn't. She had been running for so long, hiding from these powerful hunters, and now she had ended up in his small apartment. He had offered her help, his home, his safety. But was it enough? Could he protect her from something so dangerous? Zara, the young man said, breaking the silence. Are you sure you can't call for help? Someone from your world. Surely there's someone who can fight these hunters. Zara shook her head, her long purple hair falling over her shoulders. I tried. I've contacted others, but my people are scattered. Most of them are gone. The ones left are too far away or too weak to fight. These hunters, they've destroyed everything we've built. They have no mercy. I can't risk getting anyone else hurt. He felt a pit form in his stomach. The hopelessness in her voice, the way she spoke about her people, it was clear that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the end of everything she had known. Then, what now? He asked quietly, looking at her with concern. What should we do? Zara took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his for the first time in a while. I don't know, she admitted. But I can't stay here forever. I can't let them find me. If they do, I don't know what they'll do to you, to anyone who helps me. The young man swallowed hard. The thought of being dragged into her fight was terrifying, but the thought of her facing these hunters alone was even worse. He couldn't let her go. He had already promised to protect her. Suddenly, a noise outside caught his attention. It was faint but unmistakable, a low hum, like an engine or some kind of machinery. It sent a chill down his spine. He glanced toward the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness outside. What was that? He asked, his voice tight with unease. Zara's eyes narrowed. I don't know, she whispered. But we need to be careful. They don't announce themselves. They don't make noise when they arrive. If we're hearing something, it means they're close. Too close. The young man stood up, moving to the window with careful steps. His mind raced. Could it be? Was it possible that the hunters had already found her? He peered out the window, but all he saw was the empty street, lit only by the dim glow of a streetlight. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet that hum, it had felt like a warning, like something was moving just beyond his sight, something he couldn't yet understand. I don't see anything, he said, turning back to Zara. But what if they're already here? How do we know? Zara was already on her feet, her eyes scanning the room as though she could sense something he couldn't. We don't, she said, her voice steady but urgent. But we have to act like they are. They could be anywhere, watching us, waiting. The longer we stay here, the more vulnerable we become. The young man felt a knot form in his stomach. He had never been involved in anything like this, never had to worry about being hunted by galactic forces or evading powerful, deadly enemies. His life had been simple, ordinary, and now it was suddenly anything but. We can't just stay here and wait for them to come, he said, pacing back and forth. We need to do something. Zara nodded, her expression serious. I know. I'll try to make contact with some of my allies. If they're out there, they might be able to help us. But we have to be quick. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely it is they'll find us. The young man felt a surge of determination. He had promised to help Zara, and now it was time to follow through. He wasn't about to let her face this alone. Even if he didn't know exactly how to fight back, he could at least help her survive. Let's get out of here, he said, his voice resolute. We'll leave the apartment. Find somewhere safer. Zara hesitated, her eyes searching his face as if weighing his words. It's dangerous, she warned. They could be tracking us already. Moving might make us more vulnerable. I know, he said, but I don't want to sit here and wait to be found. We need to make a move now. Zara studied him for a long moment before nodding. You're right, she said quietly. Let's go, but stay close. We have to be careful. The young man grabbed his jacket and slipped it on quickly. Zara did the same, gathering her things. She moved with surprising speed, her glowing tattoos flickering as she prepared for whatever was to come. The two of them exchanged a quick glance before heading for the door. As they stepped outside, the air felt cold, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. The hum from earlier was still faintly echoing in the distance, a reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the safety of his apartment. He didn't know what they would face in the next few hours, or where they would go. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let Zara face it alone. Together, they would survive. The young man and Zara moved quickly through the quiet streets, their footsteps muffled by the soft hum of the city at night. The air was colder than it had been earlier, and a tense silence hung between them. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential danger. The young man's mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened so far. What kind of hunters were these? What kind of power did they have? And why did Zara seem so certain they were already on their trail? As they walked, the hum they had heard earlier seemed to grow louder. It wasn't coming from the ground, but from the air, low and steady, like the sound of a distant engine. The young man's heart began to race. Was it them? Were the hunters already here? Zara, sensing his unease, glanced over at him. "We're not safe yet," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keep moving. Don't stop until we find somewhere secure." The young man nodded, his thoughts still spinning. He had no idea where they were going, or how they would escape this nightmare. All he knew was that he couldn't let Zara face this alone. He had promised to protect her, and now that promise was leading him into the unknown. They passed darkened alleyways, empty storefronts, and quiet homes. The city felt strangely deserted, the kind of place where danger could slip by unnoticed. The hum in the air seemed to follow them, growing ever closer, but when they looked around they couldn't spot anything unusual. It was as if the world had become a maze, one that hid the truth from their eyes. Finally, after what felt like hours, Zara stopped in front of an old, abandoned building. The door was rusted, the windows boarded up. It looked like no one had set foot there in years. "This is it," Zara said, her voice calm but urgent. "We'll stay here for now. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing." The young man nodded. He was exhausted, physically and mentally. His nerves were frayed, his mind a constant whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. But he followed her inside, stepping into the darkness of the building. The interior was dusty and silent, with only the faint sound of dripping water echoing through the empty halls. The young man's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw the shadows cast by broken furniture and shattered glass. It was a far cry from the safety of his apartment, but at least it was a place to hide. For now, Zara immediately went to the corner of the room, where a stack of old crates sat. She moved them aside carefully, revealing a small hidden compartment in the floor. The young man watched in silence, impressed by how resourceful she was. She had clearly been running for a long time. "What is this?" he asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "A safe spot," Zara replied, glancing up at him. "It's not much, but it's secure. No one can see us from here." She knelt down and began to open the compartment, revealing a small stash of supplies, food, water, and a few tools. The young man couldn't help but wonder how she had gathered all this, how she had survived for so long on the run. "We'll rest here for a while," Zora continued, "but we can't stay long. They'll be looking for us." The young man sat down on one of the nearby crates, trying to process everything she had told him. His thoughts kept circling back to the same question. What exactly were these hunters, and how had they become so powerful? Zara had been clear about the danger they posed, but she hadn't explained exactly what made them so unstoppable. "You said these hunters can track you anywhere," he said, breaking the silence. "How do they do it? What kind of technology do they have?" Zora paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she thought. "It's not just technology," she said slowly. "They have something else, a kind of ability. They don't need to use tools to track someone. They can sense fear. It's like a sixth sense. They can feel it, like a pull. When they're hunting, they can sense where their prey is, even if they're miles away. It's like they can smell it. The young man felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard of creatures like that, predators who used their instincts to track and hunt, but he never imagined they could exist in real life. The idea that someone could feel fear from miles away was terrifying. It wasn't just the hunters' technology that made them dangerous. It was their very nature. "So they can find us anytime, anywhere?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Zara nodded. "Yes, but it's not just about fear. It's also about something deeper. They're prey. They don't just kill. They take them. They break them down, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." The young man felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't imagine what that must be like. To be hunted by creatures who didn't just kill, but who tore you apart, mentally and physically. Zara had been through that. She had survived that. And now she was here, with him, asking for help. "You don't have to explain it all," he said softly. "I don't need to know everything. I just want to help you." Zora's eyes softened, and for the first time since he met her, he saw a glimpse of the person she once was, the person before the hunters, before the fear. She smiled faintly, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what that means to me." The young man smiled back, but the weight of the situation still hung over him. They were hiding, but how long would it last? These hunters were relentless. Zara had been running from them for so long, and now she had brought him into the danger too. He looked around the dark, abandoned building, his mind racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hunters were still out there, waiting, hunting. And soon, they would come for Zara. He wasn't sure how much longer they could stay hidden, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her face them alone. Not now. Not ever. The hours seemed to stretch on in the hidden room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of water dripping from a crack in the ceiling. The young man sat on an overturned crate, his mind racing. He glanced over at Zara, who was staring at the wall, her face tense with worry. It was clear that she was always on alert, always thinking several steps ahead, as if there was no such thing as peace. Her eyes, usually sharp and watchful, now seemed distant, haunted by memories of the things she had run from. The young man shook his head. How had this all gotten so complicated? One moment, he was sitting in his apartment enjoying a pizza, and the next, he was hiding with a stranger who wasn't even from Earth, running from galactic hunters. The world outside felt like a distant memory, and the life he had known now seemed almost unreal. He sighed and stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. "We can't just keep hiding here forever," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We need a plan, a way to fight back." Zara didn't look at him right away. She kept her eyes focused on the floor, her fingers tracing the patterns of dust on the cracked wooden boards. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice low but firm. "We can't fight them. They're too powerful. I've seen entire worlds fall because of them. You saw how they hunted me, how they never gave up. If you try to fight them, you won't stand a chance." The young man was silent for a moment, processing her words. He had thought of running, but now that seemed less and less like an option. He couldn't just turn his back on Zara. She had trusted him with her life, and he wasn't about to abandon her now. But the thought of facing these hunters, it seemed impossible. If what she said was true, then they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for everything they had. "I know it's dangerous," he said after a long pause, "but we can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. We need to take action. We need to find a way to stop them. If we don't, it won't just be you they'll come for. They'll come for everyone." Zara finally looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "I wish it were that simple," she whispered. "But you don't know what they're capable of. They don't just hunt, they destroy. They'll take you, tear you apart. And I won't be able to stop them." Her words hit him like a cold wave, but he didn't flinch. He knew what she was saying was true. He had seen the way her eyes darkened whenever she spoke of the hunters. The fear in her voice wasn't just from what had happened to her, it was from what could happen to him. To them both. "We don't have a choice," the young man said firmly. "If we run, they'll just keep hunting us. But if we fight back, maybe we have a chance. A small one, but a chance." Zara stood up slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. She seemed to weigh his words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never fought them. I've never even had the chance to stand my ground. Every time I've tried, they've come out on top. They know how to break you." The young man walked over to her, standing just a few feet away. "Maybe it's time to change that," he said. "Maybe it's time for us to fight back." Zara looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of doubt in his eyes. When she found none, she nodded slowly, though the worry still lingered in her expression. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We'll do it your way. But know this, I can't promise you that it'll work. And I can't promise you that you'll come out of it alive." The young man smiled, though it was more a gesture of determination than true confidence. "I'm not afraid. We'll figure something out. Together." Zara's eyes softened. For a moment, she looked almost human again, as if the weight of her past wasn't so heavy. "You're brave," she said softly. "Most people would run away, but you're staying. That's more than I could ask for." The young man felt a warmth spread through him at her words. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was doing the right thing. But the reality of what lay ahead still loomed over them. The hunters were out there, searching. And if they found them, it would be over. There was no going back from that. "We'll need weapons," the young man said. "Something that can hold them off." Zara nodded. "I have some tools," she said, walking over to a small bag she had packed with supplies. She pulled out a few small devices, gadgets that looked like nothing more than strange, metallic ornaments. She handed them to him. "These aren't much, but they can help slow them down. I'll show you how to use them." The young man took the devices, turning them over in his hands. They didn't look like much, but if they could stop the hunters even for a few seconds, it might be enough. He had to believe it would be. "All right," he said, a sense of resolve settling in. "Let's do this. It's time to fight back." Zara glanced up at him, her expression one of both hope and fear. The young man didn't know what they were walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, they wouldn't be giving up without a fight. And that was all that mattered. The air felt heavier now. The young man and Zara stood side by side, their hearts pounding in their chests as they peered through the broken windows of their hiding spot. They had planned as much as they could, but the uncertainty of what was coming weighed on them. The time to act had arrived. No more running. No more hiding. They were going to fight, whether they were ready or not. Zara adjusted the small devices she had given him earlier. They were supposed to create a temporary barrier, something that might slow down the hunters just enough for them to escape, or, if they were lucky, to turn the tide in their favor. But luck was something the young man didn't feel he had in this situation. This was a fight for survival, and it was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. "I don't know if this will work," Zara said quietly, her voice tinged with fear. "But we'll have to make it work. There's no other choice." The young man nodded, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't afraid, at least, not anymore. But he was anxious. This was the moment they had been preparing for. He turned to Zara and gave her a small smile, the kind that said, "We can do this." "I'm ready," he said. "Let's do this." They gathered their things, silently checking each other's gear one last time. Zara's face was hard with determination, but her eyes held a sadness that the young man couldn't ignore. She had been through so much. She didn't deserve this. No one did. "We'll make it out of here," the young man said, more to himself than to Zara. "We'll make sure they don't win." Zara didn't reply immediately, but she gave him a sharp look, as if telling him to stay focused. She was right, of course. This wasn't a moment for speeches. This was the time for action. They stepped out of the building, moving cautiously into the night. The city was still eerily quiet, and the only sound was the soft crunch of their footsteps on the ground. The hum that had been following them for hours now felt louder, closer. The hunters were near. They were close. Too close. "We need to get to the old subway tunnels," Zora said in a low voice. "It's the only place they won't expect us to go." The young man nodded. He didn't care where they went as long as it was somewhere safe. But he had learned quickly that in this fight, there was no real safety, only the illusion of it, at best. They moved quickly, staying to the shadows. Every so often, they'd hear the distant sounds of voices or strange mechanical noises, but they didn't dare stop. They had to keep moving, stay ahead of the hunters. The hunters who could feel fear. The hunters who could smell it from miles away. They had to be smart. As they reached the edge of the city, Zora paused. She turned to the young man, her face grim. "We're about to cross into their territory," she said. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." The young man swallowed hard, his throat dry. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he wasn't about to back down now. Not after everything they had been through. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers with the same unspoken promise he had made before. He wouldn't leave her. They reached the entrance to the old subway tunnels, hidden beneath a crumbling staircase in the back alley. Zora moved the debris aside with ease, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. She glanced around once more before stepping into the shadows. The young man followed without hesitation. The air inside the tunnels was cool and damp, the smell of mildew and dust hanging heavy. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the passage. They moved deeper into the darkness, the only light coming from a small, flickering device that Zora had activated to help guide their way. "We're safe here, for now," Zora whispered, "but it won't last. The hunters know this place. They'll find us." The young man felt a chill at her words. He wanted to believe they had time, that they could rest and regroup, but he knew better. He had seen the way Zora's eyes never stopped scanning, never stopped looking for the next threat. There was no time to rest. There was only time to survive. Suddenly, a faint sound caught his attention. A movement in the distance. A shadow flickered in the darkness. He tensed, his heart leaping into his throat. "They're here," Zora whispered, her voice urgent. "Stay down. Stay quiet." The young man crouched beside her, trying to control his breathing. He didn't know how many hunters were out there, or how close they were, but he could feel it now. The hunter's presence, like a dark cloud hanging over them. The air seemed to crackle with danger, as if something was waiting to pounce at any moment. Then, the noise grew louder. A low, mechanical hum, the same hum that had followed them all night. The sound of something big, something powerful, moving through the tunnels. "They're using cloaking devices," Zora muttered. "They're getting closer." The young man's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled out one of the small devices she had given him. He had no idea how it worked, but now wasn't the time to question it. He pressed the button, hoping it would do what Zora had promised. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sudden burst of energy shot out, temporarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, the hunters were no longer invisible. They were standing right in front of them. Two tall, imposing figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing faintly red. They had found them. The young man's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for. The moment they had to fight for their lives. But as he stood there, staring into the eyes of their enemies, he knew one thing for sure. They were not going down without a fight.